so much for having me speak to you today to the 5th ESG Taiwan Sustainable International Summit. We're certainly in challenging times, and I appreciate the opportunity to address some key issues that we're facing, particularly those challenges that relate to biodiversity and climate change, and how we can use our financial and economic systems to help tackle these interlinked crises. We were asked to look at the interlinkages among biodiversity, water, food, and health in the context of climate change, and our findings were approved by over 140 countries several months ago. We're facing an ever-worsening climate emergency, with the global mean temperature in 2024 surpassing the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement, leading to uncertain and unprecedented extreme events threatening lives, infrastructure, and ecosystems the world over. At the same time, we face a nature emergency. Over 1 million species are threatened with extinction, and the global rate of decline in species has accelerated. But these are not the only challenges we face. We are in a global water crisis. So over 700 million people, or 1 in 10, lack access to clean water. We're facing a global food system crisis. Nearly 800 million people on the planet are facing chronic hunger, with 7 million deaths per year from diets low in whole grains, fruits, nuts, and seeds. We're facing a range of global health and well-being challenges, including antimicrobial resistance, increases in impacts of climate change on a range of health issues such as heat stress, a rise in non-communicable diseases such as cardiovascular conditions, diabetes, and cancer, and inadequate prevention and preparedness for infectious diseases and pandemics. So it's really apt to refer to our current moment as a true polycrisis, so intersecting multiple crises together. So let's be very clear about how these crises interact with one another. So climate change is accelerating biodiversity loss, it's disrupting ecosystems, and creating significant economic and financial risks. Biodiversity loss threatens food production, provisioning of clean water, and health and well-being. We can see these interconnections through just one example of land use change, driven by unsustainable agricultural production, which then cascades through the system, leading to increased use of pesticides and fertilizers, but which run off and pollute water, which then in turn affects human and ecosystem health. It is the vital infrastructure on which society and the economy is built. So even if climate change gets more attention sometimes, it really is biodiversity and functioning ecosystems that are playing a vital role in providing nature's contributions to people. This includes regulating the climate and nutrient and hydrological cycles that are essential for providing sufficient and clean water, sustaining our food systems, regulating pests and pathogens, improving physical and mental health, providing traditional and modern medicines, and supporting cultural identities. So biodiversity is not just about saving bunnies and butterflies. It's really about the fundamental basis on which we have built our society, our prosperity, and the well-being of future generations. The problem is that biodiversity is now declining faster than at any time in human history. Particularly in the last 30 to 50 years, all of our assessed indicators show biodiversity declines of between 2 to 6% per decade. We also see similar negative trends for water availability, for the rise in climate disasters. It really is only some aspects of human health and food production that have been trending in positive directions in recent decades. The converse means that biodiversity loss reduces the ability of ecosystems, such as forests and oceans, to sequester carbon, thereby increasing greenhouse gas concentrations and accelerating climate change. Biodiversity loss also reduces water availability, it increases pathogen emergence, and it exacerbates some forms of water pollution, all of which undermine human, plant, and animal health. You can see the negative red arrows across the displayed data table, which show these negative pressures of various indirect drivers, such as GDP, on biodiversity, water, climate, and health. Only food production is likely to increase as a result of increases in GDP, reflected in the blue arrow. So all of these direct and indirect drivers interact with one another, and they cause cascading impacts across these nexus elements. All of this is made worse by our current approach to fragmented governance, particularly treating biodiversity, water, food, health, and climate change. The cost of addressing biodiversity loss, for example, will double for every 10 years that we delay. Every year that we fail to address climate change adds an estimated $500 billion per year in the cost of policy action. So all told, these current economic and financial systems are investing $7 trillion per year in activities that damage biodiversity and other nexus elements. Compare this to our estimated funding for positive biodiversity incentives, which is only around $200 billion per year. So you can see that's a difference of on the order of 35 times. And in our assessment report, we looked in particular at 71 response options where we assessed them in depth, and they represented 10 broad categories of action. These include conserving ecosystems, restoring natural and semi-natural ecosystems, managing ecosystems, consuming sustainably, reducing pollution and waste, integrating planning and governance, managing risks, ensuring rights and equity, aligning our financing, and then an others category containing several other important options. But in order to make these options work and scale them up, financial tools are particularly important. So that means the transformation of economic and financial systems can help us strengthen the capacity of decision makers to be able to make those connections between economic and ecological systems and to use sustainable finance and economic instruments. So we particularly focused on our report on what we consider to be 3 complementary categories of financial tools that could collectively help us align economic and financial systems with biodiversity and climate and help us increase those financial resources that are available. So first, are measures to improve the accessibility, availability, and use of information, including information related to the diverse values of nature by economic and financial decision makers. This is needed as we know that financial markets do not always efficiently price nature-related risks. So examples in this category include transparency and reporting requirements, approaches like green taxonomies, the incorporation of biodiversity and climate-related information in appraising public spending, and the adoption and use of metrics beyond GDP. So the second category are options that are aimed to improve access to and availability of financial resources through the use of reformed or new financial and economic instruments. So examples in this category might include green bonds, debt swaps, microfinance, payments for environmental services, biodiversity offsets and credits, as well as tax policies to change the availability of public funding. So the third category of financial tools that we highlight in our assessment report are changes in the fiscal and regulatory enabling environment. And that can adjust our financial incentives and increase the costs of doing harm to nature. So these approaches encourage changes in business models, including through improving returns to investments that benefit nature. So examples in this category include improving safeguards and standards for investments and tackling negative incentives such as harmful subsidies. So global reviews suggest that there's a lot of room for improvement here. So for example, of 155 banks that have been identified as likely investors in large infrastructure or development projects that might impact biodiversity and which hold assets over $500 billion, of that category, only 42% had any biodiversity safeguards. And of that number, 86% were harmonized with Performance Standard 6 of the International Finance Corporation. So it really highlights the powerful role of this particular institution and that particular standard in really setting accountability. And it really argues for more and better of that. So given Taiwan's rich biodiversity and evolving sustainability policies, I will also add that by this time next year, IPBES will have a new assessment report with particular details on the role of the private sector, and it's called the Business and Biodiversity Assessment. So this report is particularly focused on methodologies to help categorize the dependencies and impacts of business on biodiversity. It helps assess criteria and indicators for measuring these dependencies and impacts. and it assesses options that governments, the financial sector, and civil society interacting with businesses can take to strengthen sustainability approaches. So I urge you to follow this report and check it out when it is released next year, because I think it'll be very helpful for many of your ESG efforts. So to conclude, our Nexus assessment findings really reinforce that urgent need for integrated actions that simultaneously advance biodiversity conservation, climate change mitigation and adaptation, water security, food system resilience, and human health and well-being. The sector-specific policies that we have used in the past have yielded suboptimal outcomes, and they've exacerbated our existing challenges, like resource depletion leading to biodiversity loss. These approaches that consider multiple challenges together and look for co-benefits of action are the path forward. However, these interventions are only likely to be possible with support and financing from the private sector, which is going to require careful governance, policy alignment, and adaptive use of new and innovative financial tools to ensure long-term sustainability.